the Book of Knowledge, a foundation for a revived faith. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Sufi Essence with Hamid Said. In the vast and intricate body of Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali's work, few texts are as foundational and revolutionary as Kitab al Ilm, the Book of Knowledge. This monumental work is the very first book of his magnum opus, Ihya Ulum, the revival of the religious sciences, and its placement is no accident. Ghazali, a scholar of immense repute who famously abandoned his prestigious position to embark on a decade-long spiritual journey, understood that the crisis of his time was, at its core, a crisis of knowledge. The scholars of his era had become obsessed with the legalistic and external aspects of faith, viewing knowledge as a means to achieve fame, wealth, and status, rather than as a tool for spiritual purification and proximity to God. The result was a religious practice that was intellectually rigorous, but spiritually hollow, a body without a soul. This book is Ghazali's powerful and systematic attempt to address this crisis. It is not merely a book about knowledge. It is a profound and radical revaluation of its very purpose, ethics, and responsibilities. Our discourse today will undertake a comprehensive and structural exegesis of this seminal text. We will argue that Ghazali's enduring legacy in this work is his masterful synthesis of scholastic rigor with Sufi spirituality, providing a new, integrated paradigm for the pursuit of knowledge. We will follow the book's own internal logic, moving from a philosophical defense of the superiority of knowledge to a deep psychological critique of its corrupting influences, and finally to a practical guide for both the teacher and the student. Our objective is to illuminate how Ghazali, through this work, sought to revive the religious sciences not by inventing new doctrines, but by reinfusing the traditional sciences with a living spiritual heart. Part 1. The unassailable virtue and superiority of knowledge. Ghazali begins the Book of Knowledge with a powerful and comprehensive defense of the superiority and virtue of knowledge itself. He understands that to convince the scholars of his time to change their ways, he must first establish the immense value of what they possess. He dedicates a substantial portion of the book to providing irrefutable proofs for the preeminence of knowledge from the very sources that these scholars revered: the Quran and the Hadith. This is a masterful rhetorical strategy, using the very tools of the academics to dismantle their corrupted intellectual edifice. He cites numerous Quranic verses, such as Allah's saying in Surah Al-Zumar, "Say, are those who know equal to those who do not know?" And his saying in Surah Al-Mujadila, "Allah will raise those who have believed among you and those who are given knowledge by degrees." Ghazali presents these verses not as mere statements, but as profound theological truths. Knowledge in this context is not just a human endeavor, but a divine attribute that distinguishes humanity and elevates it above all of creation. It is the very purpose for which the first human Adam was created, as the Quran states that Allah taught him the names of all things, demonstrating the spiritual and intellectual superiority of knowledge. From the Hadith, Ghazali presents a vast collection of narrations that extol the virtue of the scholar. He cites the Prophet Muhammad saying, "The superiority of a scholar over a worshipper is like my superiority over the lowest of you." And another, "When a person dies, all his deeds come to an end, except for three: a continuing charity, beneficial knowledge, or a righteous child who prays for him." This hadith in particular is a powerful argument for the enduring legacy of knowledge. Unlike wealth or power, knowledge is a continuous charity, sadaqah jariyah, a spiritual legacy that continues to benefit its owner even after death. The ink of a scholar, in Ghazali's view, is more valuable than the blood of a martyr, because it is the source from which 1,000 martyrs might arise. Ghazali also makes a crucial distinction between knowledge and other virtues. While piety, devotion, and character are all praiseworthy, they are ultimately the fruits of knowledge. A worshipper without knowledge, he argues, is like a traveler in the dark who does not know where they are going. Knowledge is the lamp that illuminates the path, guiding the worshipper to the correct destination. The scholar, therefore, is not just a person who knows facts, but a person who knows the path to God and can guide others upon it. This is a powerful and persuasive argument for the immense spiritual responsibility that comes with the possession of knowledge. In this first part, Ghazali lays a solid foundation, establishing knowledge as a divine trust and an indispensable prerequisite for any spiritual journey. Part 2. Praiseworthy and blameworthy knowledge. The alchemical distinction. Having established the virtue of knowledge, Ghazali now embarks on the most critical and revolutionary part of his argument. The distinction between praiseworthy knowledge ilmi, Mahmud, and blameworthy knowledge ilmi, Madmum. This distinction is the alchemical core of the book. For it is here that Ghazali separates the pure gold of transformative knowledge from the dross of useless or corrupted information. His critique is directed not at knowledge itself, but at the purpose and intention behind its acquisition. Ghazali divides praiseworthy knowledge into two categories. The first is religious knowledge, which is directly related to the spiritual path. This includes the sciences of jurisprudence, fiqh, theology, kalam, Quranic, exegesis, tafsir, and hadith. However, Ghazali's treatment of these sciences is unique. He insists that their purpose is not to win intellectual debates or to gain social status. The purpose of fiqh, for example, is not just to know the legal rulings, but to understand the wisdom and the spiritual purpose behind them, and to apply them with sincerity. The purpose of kalam is to intellectually defend the foundations of faith, but Ghazali warns against becoming so engrossed in dialectics that one loses sight of the ultimate goal, which is a tranquil and certain heart. The second category is worldly knowledge that serves a religious purpose. Ghazali, a man of profound intellectual breadth, was no anti-intellectual. He argues that sciences like medicine, mathematics, and even poetry are praiseworthy if they are used to serve God and humanity. He uses the analogy of medicine. A physician who studies medicine to save lives is engaging in an act of worship. A ruler who studies the art of governance to ensure justice is fulfilling a religious duty. This is a profoundly balanced and integrated view of knowledge, one that sees all of creation and all of human endeavor as potentially sacred if the intention is pure. Ghazali then turns his attention to blameworthy knowledge. He identifies two main types. The first is knowledge that is useless and has no spiritual or practical benefit. This includes fields like astrology, divination, and magic. Ghazali argues that to spend time on such knowledge is a waste of a limited resource, the time of one's life. The second, and more insidious type of blameworthy knowledge is that which is sought for corrupt purposes. This is Ghazali's powerful critique of the scholars of his time. He argues that the pursuit of religious knowledge for fame, wealth, or status is one of the greatest spiritual diseases of the heart. A scholar who uses their knowledge to gain a following or to impress others is like a person who possesses a magnificent sword, but uses it only to show off its intricate hilt. The purpose of the sword, which is to defend the truth, has been completely lost. This is where Ghazali introduces the critical role of sincerity, ikhlas, and intention, niyya. For Ghazali, the spiritual value of knowledge is not in its content, but in the intention of the person who possesses it. A person who memorizes the entire Quran to impress others has gained nothing spiritually, while a person who learns a single verse with sincere love for God has gained the entire universe. This distinction is the cornerstone of Ghazali's revival project, for it shifts the focus from the external act of learning to the internal state of the heart. Part 3. The duties and dangers of the scholar. In this section, Ghazali moves from a theoretical discussion of knowledge to a practical and ethical guide for the people who possess it. He presents the scholar not just as a knower of facts, but as a spiritual doctor, a moral guide, and a living testament to the truth. With this high status comes immense responsibility, and Ghazali is unsparing in his critique of the scholars who fail to live up to this standard. He begins by outlining the dangers that plague a scholar's soul. The most pernicious of these is pride. Kibr, a scholar, by virtue of their knowledge, is often placed on a pedestal, and the ego can easily become inflated with a sense of superiority. Ghazali argues that this pride is a veil that prevents the scholar from seeing the truth and from recognizing their own spiritual flaws. Another great danger is hypocrisy, riya, the desire for the praise and admiration of others. Ghazali argues that the scholar is particularly susceptible to this disease, as their knowledge provides them with a ready-made platform for showing off. The scholar who speaks eloquently but does not practice what they preach is a spiritual fraud, a person who possesses the keys to the treasure but refuses to open it for themselves. Ghazali then outlines the responsibilities of the scholar. The first and most important of these is to practice what they preach. He argues that the spiritual state of a scholar's heart is of greater importance than their intellectual eloquence, and whose life is a testament to their knowledge is a more effective teacher than a person with a vast intellect and a corrupt heart. The scholar is a living embodiment of the divine message, and if the message and the messenger are in conflict, the message itself is compromised. The second responsibility is to teach with sincerity and compassion. Ghazali argues that the purpose of teaching is not to gain students or to build an intellectual empire, but to guide souls to God. A scholar must be a spiritual mentor, a person who understands the different capacities of their students and teaches them according to their needs. They must not burden their students with knowledge that is beyond their capacity, and they must be patient and compassionate in their guidance. This view of the teacher-student relationship is a direct precursor to the Sufi tradition of the spiritual master sheikh and the disciple murid, where the relationship is based on spiritual mentorship rather than academic instruction. Part 4. The inward and outward etiquette of the student. The second half of the Book of Knowledge is a practical guide for the student, or the seeker, on how to acquire knowledge with the right etiquette. Just as the scholar has duties, the student has responsibilities. And Ghazali argues that without the correct spiritual and ethical disposition, no amount of knowledge will lead to spiritual purification. Ghazali divides the etiquette of the student into two categories: outward etiquette, adab zahir, and inward etiquette, adab batin. The outward etiquette is the behavior that a student must exhibit in the presence of their teacher. This includes humility, respect, and attentiveness. Ghazali argues that a student who is arrogant or disrespectful to their teacher is closing the door to divine knowledge. The teacher is a spiritual conduit, a vessel through which knowledge is transmitted, and disrespect to the teacher is a profound disrespect to the knowledge itself. He uses the metaphor of a student as an empty vessel, ready to be filled with knowledge, and the teacher as the well. If the student holds their vessel with arrogance, it will not be filled. The inward etiquette is the spiritual discipline that the student must cultivate in their heart. The most important of these is to purify the intention. The student must seek knowledge solely for the sake of God, not for worldly gain or for the praise of others. Ghazali argues that the student must also cleanse the heart of spiritual diseases like pride and envy, which can corrupt the knowledge they acquire. The heart for Ghazali is a mirror, and if it is covered in the rust of spiritual diseases, it will not be able to reflect the divine light of knowledge. The student must also understand that the teacher is a means, but the true teacher is God himself. This understanding cultivates a profound sense of humility and dependence on God for all knowledge. This section of the book is a powerful reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is not a purely intellectual endeavor, but a profound spiritual journey. It is a journey of self-purification and self-discipline. A journey that begins with a sincere intention and a purified heart. Part 5. The fruits of knowledge. Transformation of the self. Ghazali's ultimate purpose in the Book of Knowledge is to show that the final and most important fruit of knowledge is the transformation of the self. Knowledge, in his view, is not an end in itself, but a means to a higher purpose, a purified heart and a life of sincere worship. He argues that true knowledge should lead to three essential spiritual states. The first is a profound fear of God, kaf. Ghazali argues that a person who truly understands the greatness of God and the nature of their own spiritual shortcomings cannot help but be in a state of reverential fear. This fear is not a paralyzing terror, but a spiritual vigilance, a constant state of awareness of one's accountability before God. This fear is the engine that drives a person to virtuous deeds and to abstain from sin. The second fruit is love of God, mahabba. Ghazali argues that true knowledge of God's names and attributes inevitably leads to a state of profound love. A person who knows God as the all-merciful, the all-generous, and the all-loving will be drawn to him with an irresistible force. This love is the ultimate purpose of the spiritual journey, a state of being in which the heart is completely consumed with the divine presence. The third and final fruit is a constant state of remembrance dhikr. A person whose heart has been purified by knowledge and filled with love for God will be in a continuous state of remembrance. Their entire life becomes an act of worship, a living testament to the divine presence. Their every thought, word, and deed is a reflection of their inner state, a state of complete surrender and devotion to God. Ghazali's final word is a powerful and integrated vision of a life lived in accordance with divine knowledge. The learned person is not a person who has simply accumulated a vast amount of information, but a person whose inner being has been transformed by that knowledge. The revival of the religious sciences, in Ghazali's view, is not a revival of intellectual debates or scholastic institutions, but a revival of the human heart, where knowledge becomes the lamp that illuminates the path to God. In conclusion, Imam al-Ghazali's The Book of Knowledge is a foundational text of immense spiritual and intellectual significance. It is a work that, while written in the 11th century, speaks directly to the spiritual and intellectual crises of our own time. In an age of information overload, where knowledge is often pursued for worldly gain and spiritual wisdom is scarce, Ghazali's message is more relevant than ever. He reminds us that the purpose of knowledge is not to amass facts, but to purify the heart, not to win arguments, but to cultivate love for God, and not to gain a following, but to find our way back to the ultimate source of all truth. Thank you for joining us on this intellectual and spiritual journey. Please subscribe to our channel to continue our exploration of the rich and profound essence of Sufism.